And what that data shows is that the energy used to power 5.2 million homes in Germany is equivalent to streaming and digital display advertising. 7.8 million metric tons. That's actually a number that's actually quite difficult to comprehend, is what this industry is causing. Hello, everyone. When I was standing at the back this morning, watching the countdown to OMR Festival this year, I realized that this industry is an industry of innovation, of action, and of driving forward. And I try and emulate that in my personal and in my professional life, but I have to admit that in this picture, last summer, I was stuck. There was no action from me. I was not moving forward. I was definitely not being innovative. And I was really struggling with knowing what to do next. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but I wonder how many of you, maybe not on the side of a rock like this, but how many of you have ever felt overwhelmed, stuck, not sure where to turn or what to do next? It could be in your personal life. It could be in our professional lives as marketers. I think that's something that happens a lot when we think about the climate crisis. Especially as an individual, I worry, am I doing enough? Am I recycling? Am I taking the train? And often, I don't even think about what this means as someone who has an impact in the world of marketing. If you've listened to any of the talks on the Blue Stage earlier today, there is a lot of discussion around the products and how we bring those products to market, how we make the products that we are selling more sustainable, but a lot less about the online world that we're living in and how actually we are causing some problems there as well. So even when everything is very grey and nebulous and you feel stuck, what I find is the best thing to do to start off with is to take an assessment, to understand where we're at. Last year, I realized halfway up that very, very high, very sheer drop rock face that the only way that I was able to take a step forward, literally take a step up, was to assess, understand the data points that were in front of me. How is my heart going? Am I breathing regularly? Where can I put my hand next? Because without having the data, without having the measurement, without having the understanding, it's very different to know where to go next. So over the next few minutes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you and explain to you the impact, the negative impact that the digital advertising ecosystem is having on the world, and then maybe unfreeze us. So instead of being frozen, instead of being in that flight, fright, or fight, freeze response, what can we do to get out of that situation? So some of you may be thinking, Anne, we all know that packaging, we all know that these complex supply chains of moving goods from one side of the world to the other has obviously a carbon footprint. It's a footprint. But what do you mean that there's a problem with digital advertising? How can that be an issue? At Scope3, where I'm the co-founder, we spend our days talking about how we can decarbonize the industry. And in December of last year, we released our third State of Sustainable Advertising report. And what that data shows is that the energy used to power 5.2 million homes in Germany is equivalent to streaming and digital display advertising. 7.8 million metric tons. That's actually a number that's actually quite difficult to comprehend, is what this industry is causing. How? Why? Let's dig in a little bit more. Unfortunately, Germany is actually one of the highest emitters, if you look at it on an average basis. So in the digital marketing world, we think of impressions, we think of how many eyeballs, in theory, should see an ad, and over 500, so it's almost 600 grams of carbon dioxide per 1,000 impressions are emitted in Germany. That is equivalent, actually, to burning a lump of coal. So for every 1,000 impressions that's served here on the internet in Germany, it's equivalent to burning a lump of coal. So you can imagine how this adds up over time and why we have such a large problem. But where do these emissions actually come from? If we drill down a little bit more and we think about the life cycle, the journey of an ad, most ad emissions actually come from what we call the ad selection process. When we think about advertising and when we think about what we're actually trying to do, in the internet, we have a lot of data that we can use to serve the right ad to the right user at the right time. That decision-making process that starts when a user visits a website, opens an app, starts to stream their favorite content, is a chain reaction that kicks off. And that chain reaction is a supply chain. Think about how many companies are involved in that decision-making process. Each part of that decision-making process is a tiny little bit of computing power, a tiny little bit of a computer that is using a little bit of electricity. And as we know, most energy grids in the world are not purely being run by renewable energy. And so that means that there is a very small amount of carbon dioxide and equivalents being emitted into the atmosphere for every single decision. So that's almost 90% of emissions are coming from the ad selection process. Some other small figures, which are still important, 3.4% on creative delivery. What does that mean? Well, when a creative is loading on someone's phone, when the media is loading on someone's phone, that phone has been charged. And that electricity that's been used to charge that phone is being used. And again, most countries in the world do not have purely renewable energy, and this is a big problem. I think to sum this up, I'm going to show you a picture. It's one of my favorite pictures, because I think when we think about the cloud, when we think about digital, it sounds fluffy and nice. So many people are trying to move away from print to the digital world because it doesn't feel like there's as much of an impact. This is a server, very messy server farm. And the reason why I use this image is because when you see an image of essentially a farm, a factory of servers, it always looks really clean. It always looks like an amazing, pristine, rows upon rows of neat computers humming away. The amount of energy being used there is significant, and actually, that's the mess, right? So the more and more data that we're using, the more and more power that needs to be consumed is contributing and exacerbating this problem. We just had a talk, which unfortunately I didn't understand because I don't speak German. That will be my 2025 resolution, about AI. And I think we need to think about, when something is in hype, what that can do from a negative perspective. So if you think as a marketer how you're already or thinking about using AI in every single aspect of what you're doing, that is going to be significantly increasing energy consumption. And if you're not careful, that can also have a negative impact on what we're doing here. So you can see here this graph. It might be a bit small to read, but the electricity demand between 2007 and 2022 stayed relatively flat. And what we're seeing is with the increase of data centers, with the need for more energy, that again is probably non-renewable in many cases, we're starting to see a rise in that demand. So you can imagine the numbers that I showed you increasing as well over time as AI starts to take effect. This is all very doom and gloom, and I promise in a minute I'm going to give you some hope. Because if you think back to when I was on that rock phase, I needed to have the data before I knew what to do, before I could find a solution, before I could find a way out. And this is part of the way out, having this data, being empowered with this information. At Scope3, we've spent the last 2.5 years building a model so that not only can we tell you that most emissions come from the ad selection process, we can tell you publisher by publisher, ad property by ad property, the breakdown and the real strong differences between different properties and different areas of the ecosystem where you're buying. This is a 30x difference between two German publishers, one on the left, which has almost over 2,000 grams of carbon per 1,000 impressions. That is a lot. That's 4 lumps of coal being burned. Compared to this one, which is so good that some of the slices are absolutely tiny, less than 1 gram of carbon in the overall makeup. Now, why is this? Just to talk a little bit again about that visual supply chain, it's the ad selection process. So the number of partners being called in that ad selection process can have a dramatic difference. And these images are not examples. They're actually real examples that have been zoomed out, where you see not just the chain being huge, but also the wastage. Where there is complexity in an ecosystem, there is often waste. And actually, this is starting to see some hope here as marketers. We have some hope that by finding and assessing this data, there are ways that we can actually provide solutions that are not just better for the environment, but are also more effective for the outcomes that we are trying to achieve as marketers. So some good news. 70% of the industry has initiated efforts already to reduce carbon emissions. It might not be you, it might not be in your department, but it might be that with this collective brain power, this innovation at OMR, we can start to think about how we can come together and find these solutions already. This slide says only a quarter have made significant progress. I think that's really huge. Actually, a quarter of people are already finding ways to turn that anxiety, that freeze, into decisive action. I'm going to talk a little bit now about some ways that you can do that, and you can actually do that now in a minute by getting your phones out. First of all, gathering data. I've already talked about how data is power and how having measurable insights can start to mean that you can make decisions that are not just good for you, but are also good for the performance and the outcomes that you're trying to drive. Over the past 2 years, we've been working with brands like MasterCard, Sanofi, Vodafone, to help them understand that by reducing their emissions on a campaign, they can also see improvements in performance. A case study that we ran with Audi showed that they were able to reduce emissions by 52% and increase performance by a very similar percentage, which is huge. But it makes sense because by reducing waste, you're also seeing more effective outcomes at the same time. Collaborate. If you were at the talk this morning by a gentleman from Patagonia, one of the quotes that he said was that if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go further, you do it together. And what we're seeing with the fact that this whole ecosystem is so interconnected, we're seeing that by collaborating, by sharing ideas, and by working together, we're seeing dramatic reductions in areas of the ecosystem that were previously pretty high from an emissions perspective. Companies like Future, who own Marie Claire in the UK, like MSN.com, many publishers in Germany as well, have been reducing their emissions, which has a significant impact if you have that up-to-date granular data on what you're doing as a marketer. So really, really important to have that collaborative flywheel effect as we progress on this journey together. And then thirdly, take control. So this data should be available. The way that you think about sustainability should move from a side conversation into the active conversations that you're having as a marketer. Is this campaign effective? It should be. Is this campaign reducing emissions compared to our baseline of last year? It should be. So I'm going to skip this lovely slide, which talks about our collaborative sustainability platform. I'm going to ask if you want to start with some data right now. If you go to our website, we've actually opened up our insights for free to anyone who wants to look at this. So you can do 2 things. One, as you sign up for a free account, what you can do is start to understand those differences between publishers. Search for your favorite publisher. Search for your least favorite publisher. Understand where they compare and rank, benchmarked against their kind of peer set, as it were, their channel peer set within the collaborative sustainability platform. You can start to see potentially where you have pockets of high-emitting partners. And two, you can download a lot of the research that we've made available to help understand where Germany sits alongside other European and global countries from a benchmarking perspective, as well as starting to uncover correlations and relationships between really difficult problems that have been plaguing the industry, like made for advertising, and what we call high-risk properties, so climate risk properties, where by buying those properties, you're really contributing to the climate problem that we have. The good news is that by eliminating climate risk inventory, you can significantly lower your emissions. You can see here on this graph that the average grams of carbon per 1,000 impressions, that term that I introduced earlier, without climate risk is significantly lower. And these properties are only the worst top. You basically cut the froth off the top of a cappuccino. That's what we're talking about here from in terms of percentage of domains or of apps. And that makes a huge, huge difference. It drops by 60%. So purely by identifying climate risk properties in your media buying plans, you could have an impact right now by reducing the advertising of Germany by 60% within the digital advertising. That is huge. When we think about sustainability, when we think about so many of the targets that maybe your companies have been set, all of these goals that are being suggested are by 2030, by 2035, by 2040. Why don't we do something by the end of 2024 together? That would be pretty powerful and pretty impactful. So we need to measure, we need to collaborate together, and then we need to take simple, incisive action that will help us reduce emissions. The great thing about a value chain, about a supply chain, is that it's all interconnected. So when someone moves, everyone moves. When someone makes a decision and can see a path, everyone can make a decision and see a path. If you're climbing a mountain like I was, and there's someone further up, that they make the move, that you realize, oh, I can do that too. That is what is so impactful about having the data and knowing what to do next. So I really hope that you're all ready to join me. Please start this journey. I'm so excited to be updating everyone on the fact that here today, in Germany, in Hamburg, at the OMR Festival, people are ready to take control, take action, and use the data that we already have to start making a meaningful impact in reducing the carbon emissions of this ecosystem. Thank you.